Welcome to Healthy Kidneys After 60. I am your host, Jane Pauley. Today, we are touching on a topic that sits quietly in the back of the mind of every person over 60, the fear of losing our independence. We often think of aging as a slow slide toward a wheelchair or a cane, but what if that prophecy of decline isn't a rule? What if the secret to walking 5 miles a day at 93 is hidden in 7 minutes of your morning? Joining me today is someone who has seen the inside of our most complex systems and the reality of thousands of patients, the chief medical correspondent for CNN and a practicing neurosurgeon, Dr. Sanjay Gupta. Sanjay, it is truly a privilege to have you here to help us navigate these years with grace and strength.
It is an absolute pleasure to be here with you, Jane. You know, in my years of practice, I have realized that the most profound medicine often doesn't come in a vial or from a surgeon's scalpel. It comes from the choices we make between the time we wake up and the time we have our first cup of coffee. I have spent a lot of time lately looking at why some of my patients seem to age in reverse, while others much younger feel like they are fading away. I am so glad we are having this conversation because there is so much hope for the human body, even when we think it is too late. I really believe that for many people listening today, their best years of movement are still ahead of them if we just change the lens through which we view aging.
Sanjay, I want to start with something I hear so often when I talk to friends in our age group. There is this collective breath we all hold, waiting for the wheels to fall off. We see a slight limp or feel a bit of stiffness in the morning, and immediately a dark thought creeps in. Is this the beginning of the end? I remember talking to a gentleman recently who told me his doctor basically gave him a wheelchair prophecy, saying that at 79 he should prepare to lose his mobility by 80. It feels like we are taught to expect decline as if it's an inevitable tax we pay for living a long life. Why is it that some people seem to hit 60 and just go down a steep hill, while others are still hiking trails in their 80s? Is it just luck of the draw, or is there something more sinister at play in our daily routines that we aren't seeing?
That prophecy you mentioned, Jane, is something I encounter far too often in the medical world, and frankly, it breaks my heart because it becomes a self-fulfilling cycle. When a person is told they are going to be in a wheelchair, they start to subconsciously withdraw. They move less because they are afraid of wearing out what they have left, not realizing that for the human body, disuse is actually the fastest way to decay. And we have this misconception that our joints are like car tires, that they have a certain amount of mileage and then they just bald. But biology doesn't work that way. Our bodies are living tissues that respond to the signals we give them. The reason you see such a massive gap between two people of the same age often comes down to the unseen habits. It's not just about a major fall or a sudden heart attack. It's about the thousands of tiny decisions made over a decade. We see people who sit for 6 hours straight, who treat toast and jam as a complete meal, and who haven't had a full glass of water before noon in years. These aren't just lifestyle choices, they are biological signals telling the body it no longer needs to be strong. When you stop asking your muscles to support you, your brain literally starts to prune those connections. It's a use it or lose it system on a very high stakes level.
It's terrifying, isn't it, to think that by trying to save ourselves or rest more, we are actually accelerating the very thing we fear. I think about that 79-year-old man constantly. He wasn't afraid of the pain itself. He was afraid of the day he couldn't get himself to the bathroom or the day he couldn't walk his daughter down the aisle. It's that loss of autonomy that stings the most. You mentioned that the decline is often silent. Could you walk me through what that actually looks like in a typical day? How does a person go from being a functional, active senior to someone who feels like they are stuck in their own body without even noticing the transition?
It's a slow, quiet theft, Jane. It usually starts with something we call lifestyle compensation. You might find that instead of walking to the mailbox, you wait for your spouse to bring the mail in. Or you start choosing the chair that is easier to get out of because your knees feel a bit rusty. You don't think much of it, you just think you're being smart. But behind the scenes, your circulation is slowing down. Your muscles are beginning to atrophy. The inflammation from a high-carb, low-protein breakfast starts to settle into your joints like a thick fog. By the time you feel the big pain, the environment for decline has been set for months or even years. I often tell my patients that the prophecy of the wheelchair isn't written in your DNA, it's often written in your living room furniture and your kitchen pantry. We have become a culture that prizes comfort, but for the aging body, too much comfort is a death sentence for mobility. The downward spiral is almost always a result of the body responding to a lack of demand. If you don't demand that your legs carry you, your body will stop investing the energy to keep those legs strong. It's a brutal efficiency of nature.
So what you're saying is that the cliff we fear isn't something we just fall off one day. We are actually building the ramp ourselves, brick by brick, with every hour we spend stationary and every meal that doesn't nourish our muscles. That is both a heavy realization and, in a strange way, a very hopeful one, because if we are the ones building the ramp, we are also the ones who can stop. But for someone sitting at home right now, perhaps feeling that stiffness or that fear, how do they even begin to challenge a prophecy that a medical professional has already laid out for them? Is it truly possible to reverse the momentum of a body that has already started to slow down?
Absolutely, and that is the most important message I want to get across today. The momentum can be shifted. I have seen patients in their late 80s go from being nearly homebound to walking around the block 3 times a day. The body is incredibly resilient if you give it the right inputs. It starts by breaking the silence of the decline. It starts with recognizing that pain isn't always a stop sign. Sometimes it's a change direction sign. We have to move away from the idea that we are too old to improve. When you start introducing even 7 minutes of intentional movement, or you swap that morning toast for an egg, you are sending a new signal to your cells. You are telling your body, we are still in the game. I still need this machinery to work. And the beautiful thing about biology is that it listens. It doesn't matter if you are 60, 70, or 90, your cells are constantly regenerating. The goal isn't to become a marathon runner overnight. It's to stop the quiet theft and start reclaiming your territory inch by inch. We are going to talk about exactly how to do that, but the first step is refusing to accept the wheelchair as your destiny just because of a number on a birth certificate.
It is a heavy burden to carry, that silent fear of one day waking up and realizing your body no longer obeys your commands. I often hear from seniors who describe a moment of hesitation before they stand up from a deep sofa, or that split second of panic when their balance wavers on a rug. It is not just about the physical ache, is it? It is the psychological erosion of confidence that happens when you start avoiding the things you love, like tending to a garden or walking to the park, because you are terrified that a single stumble might be the end of your freedom. How do we distinguish between the normal wear and tear of a life well lived and the kind of stagnation that actually accelerates our physical decline? And what happens to the spirit when we start retreating into our own homes?
You have touched on the very heart of the geriatric struggle, Jane, and it reminds me so vividly of a man I met not long ago, Robert Miller, but everyone calls him Bob. Bob is 79 years old and lives at 2457 Garden Glen Drive in Columbus, Ohio. He spent his entire life being the rock of his family, a man who loved his backyard more than anything. But when I met him, he was living in a state of quiet mourning for his own mobility. He told me that his knees had started to feel stiff, almost like there was sand in the joints, and instead of pushing through, he began to withdraw. He stopped pruning his roses, he stopped walking down to the end of the driveway to get the mail, and he spent most of his day in a recliner. He confessed to me that he was terrified of the word wheelchair because he saw it as a cage, but by sitting still to avoid the pain, he was actually building that cage around himself. His muscles were wasting away from disuse, and his nervous system was losing the map of how to keep him upright. It is a tragic irony that the rest we think is protecting us is often the very thing that is stealing our ability to stand.
That image of Bob sitting in his recliner while his beautiful garden grows wild outside is so heartbreaking, because it is a choice made out of fear, not out of necessity. It seems like there is a fine line between listening to your body and letting your body dictate a life of limitation. When you saw Bob in that state, how did you explain to him that His strategy of preservation was actually his biggest enemy? Is there a specific point where taking it easy stops being a recovery method and starts becoming a dangerous habit that robs the legs of their power and the heart of its resilience?
I had to be very honest with Bob, Jane. I told him that every hour he spent in that chair was a signal to his heart and his bones that they were no longer needed. The human body is a masterpiece of efficiency. It will not maintain what is not being used. I explained that when he stops moving, his blood flow becomes sluggish and the synovial fluid that lubricates his joints stops circulating, making the stiffness even worse the next time he tries to move. It is a vicious cycle. You hurt, so you sit, and because you sit, you hurt more when you stand. I told him about the concept of the theft of independence, where you lose 1% of your muscle mass for every day of total inactivity. For a man in his late 70s, that is a debt you cannot afford to pay. We talked about how the fear of falling actually increases the risk of falling because your gait becomes tentative and your core becomes weak. Bob looked at me with such vulnerability and asked if it was too late to turn the ship around, and I told him that the body is waiting for a reason to be strong again. It just needs a signal.
It sounds like Bob's turning point wasn't a miracle drug or a major surgery, but a shift in his daily philosophy. If we are talking to the thousands of Bobs out there who are currently sitting in their own versions of that recliner in Ohio or anywhere else, what is the first crack in the ice? How did he go from that paralyzing fear of the wheelchair to actually taking those first terrifying steps back into his garden? And what did he find waiting for him on the other side of that effort?
It started with a glass of water and a timer, Jane. We didn't ask him to run a mile. We asked him to simply stand up every 30 minutes. I told him to drink a full glass of water first thing in the morning because dehydration makes the fascia and muscles sticky and prone to pain. Then we implemented what I call the purposeful stroll. The morning after our talk, Bob stood up, walked to his kitchen window, and just looked at his garden for 5 minutes while shifting his weight from foot to foot. It was about reestablishing the brain-to-body connection. Within a week, the angry feeling in his knees began to dull, not because the arthritis vanished, but because the muscles around the joints were finally waking up to support him. By the second month, he was back in the dirt, pruning those roses. He told me the greatest feeling wasn't just walking. It was the realization that he was no longer a prisoner of his own fear. He realized that the wheelchair prophecy was only inevitable if he remained a spectator in his own life.
We have been conditioned to believe that as we age, we should eat light, a bit of toast, some jam, perhaps a bowl of processed cereal. It feels gentle on the stomach, and it is certainly convenient. But I am starting to wonder if this standard senior diet is actually a recipe for inflammation and muscle loss. So many people wake up feeling like their joints are made of lead, and they assume it is just their age, never stopping to think that their breakfast might be the culprit. Why is it that the very foods we consider safe or traditional for older adults are often the ones draining our energy and making our bodies feel older than they actually are?
You have hit on a massive blind spot in senior health, Jane. The toast and jam trap is one of the most destructive habits I see. Think about what that meal is. It is refined carbohydrates and pure sugar. When a 60 or 70-year-old body processes that, it causes a massive spike in blood sugar followed by a crash, but more importantly, it triggers a cascade of systemic inflammation. Inflammation is the hidden fire that makes your arthritis scream and your brain feel foggy. Moreover, that kind of breakfast provides zero protein. As we age, our bodies become less efficient at processing protein, a condition we call anabolic resistance. If you aren't getting high-quality protein in the morning, your body starts scavenging your own muscle tissue to get the amino acids it needs for basic functions. So by eating light and simple, you are literally eating your own strength. I see so many patients who are frustrated because they are eating healthy according to 1980s standards. Yet they feel exhausted and weak by noon. They aren't lazy. They are biologically starved for the right nutrients.
It is a shocking thought that by following what we thought were healthy guidelines, we might be essentially cannibalizing our own muscles. I think about the people who feel that sugar crash and then reach for more crackers or another piece of fruit thinking they just need a little more energy. It creates this roller coaster of fatigue. If someone is listening to this while eating their morning toast, how do you convince them to change a habit they have had for 40 years? What is the biological payoff for trading that convenience for something like eggs or greens? And how quickly does the body respond to that shift in fuel?
The response is much faster than people think, Jane. I often tell my patients to try a protein-first experiment for just 3 days. If you replace that toast with 2 eggs and maybe half an avocado or some berries, you are giving your body the building blocks to repair tissue and the healthy fats to coat your nerves and reduce inflammation. I had a patient who told me she felt like her brain fog lifted within 48 hours of ditching her morning bagel for a protein-rich meal. It is about steadying the ship. When your blood sugar is stable, your energy is stable, and suddenly the idea of going for a walk doesn't feel like an impossible mountain to climb. We also have to talk about the hidden inflammatory oils in processed foods, things like soybean or corn oil found in those healthy granola bars. They are like throwing gasoline on the fire of joint pain. When you switch to olive oil, nuts, and real whole foods, you are essentially cooling down the internal temperature of your body. You start to move better because you aren't fighting an internal war of inflammation every time you take a step.
It sounds like we need to stop viewing food as just calories and start viewing it as information. Every bite is telling our cells to either inflame and decay or repair and thrive. I'm curious about the psychological side of this. For many seniors, food is one of the few comforts left, and being told to give up their jam or their sweet cereal feels like another loss of freedom. How do you bridge that gap so it feels like an invitation to a better life rather than a strict medical dictate that drains the joy out of the morning?
That is such a vital point, Jane. I never want people to feel like they are being punished. I tell them to look at it as an exchange. You are trading a 5-minute pleasure for 24 hours of feeling capable. I don't tell them they can't ever have a treat. I tell them to crowd it out. Start with the protein in the water first. If you have 2 eggs and a handful of walnuts, you might find you don't even want 3 pieces of toast anymore. You might just want 1. It is about empowering the body so that the comfort of food isn't the only comfort you have. The real comfort is being able to play with your grandkids without your knees throbbing. The real joy is waking up and feeling light in your joints instead of heavy. When my patients realize that their diet is the key to their travel plans, their hobbies, and their independence, the jam on the toast starts to look a lot less appealing. We are talking about reclaiming the biological youth that is still tucked away inside of them, waiting for the right fuel to ignite.
There is a certain kind of exhaustion that comes in the afternoon, especially for those of us who have worked hard all our lives. It feels so deserved to just sit in a comfortable chair, maybe watch the news or read a book for a few hours. We think we are charging our batteries, but I have heard you speak about this sedentary trap as something far more dangerous than just simple rest. It is almost as if the chair becomes a predator that slowly drains the strength from our legs while we aren't paying attention. Why is this specific habit of prolonged sitting so devastating for the over 60 population? And what is actually happening to our circulation and our muscles when we stay still for too long?
It is the silent thief of mobility, Jane, and I can give you a very specific example of how this plays out. I worked with a wonderful woman named Patricia Johnson. She goes by Pat, who is 84 years old. She lives at 18 Seaview Lane in Sarasota, Florida. Pat is brilliant and loves to read, and she had developed a habit of sitting in her favorite wingback chair for 3 or 4 hours every afternoon after lunch. She thought she was doing the right thing, resting her old legs, but she noticed that by 5 o'clock, her ankles were swollen, her feet felt like blocks of wood, and when she finally tried to stand up, her hips felt locked. She told me she felt like a tin man who needed an oil can. What was happening was that her calf pump, the muscles in the lower legs that help push blood back up to the heart, was completely shut down. When you sit for that long, gravity wins. Fluid pools in your extremities and your muscles literally begin to shorten and tighten. For Pat, that daily rest was actually a daily training session in how to become immobile.
It is so easy to fall into that rhythm, especially when the world feels like it is moving too fast and you just want to catch your breath. But the idea that our calf pump is essentially a second heart that we are turning off is a powerful image. For someone like Pat, who genuinely enjoys her reading time, it feels cruel to say she can't sit. How do you find a compromise that allows for the mental rest we need without triggering the physical stagnation that makes us feel so heavy and old? Is there a minimum effective dose of movement that can counteract those hours in the chair?
I told Pat that she didn't have to give up her books, but she had to change her contract with the chair. We came up with a 60-second intervention. I asked her to set a kitchen timer for every 30 minutes. When it went off, she didn't have to do a workout. She just had to stand up, do 10 calf raises right there next to her chair, and perhaps march in place for 1 minute. This simple act re-engages the nervous system and restarts the pump. I explained to her that movement is like lotion for the joints. When she moved, she was literally greasing the gears of her hips and ankles. We also talked about active sitting, things like rotating her ankles or lifting her knees while she was still reading. The change in her was remarkable. And within 2 weeks, the swelling in her ankles disappeared. She found that she didn't have that stiff-legged walk when she went to make dinner. By breaking up the stillness, she was preventing her body from setting like concrete.
It is fascinating that such a small change, just 60 seconds, can have such a profound impact on something as significant as systemic circulation and joint health. It makes the path to health feel much more accessible. But I wonder about the psychological barrier. When you are 84 like Pat and you feel that initial stiffness, the instinct is to sit back down because moving hurts. How did she overcome that initial discomfort of those first few calf raises? How do you coach someone through the threshold of discomfort to get to the point where the movement actually starts to feel good?
That is the hardest part, Jane. The first 30 seconds of movement are the most expensive in terms of effort and discomfort. I told Pat to expect the stiffness at first and to treat it as information rather than a warning. I told her, Pat, your joints are just telling you they've been forgotten. They aren't broken, they're just lonely. That shift in perspective changed everything for her. Instead of fearing the creak in her knees, she started to see it as the sound of the engine warming up. We also focused on the immediate rewards. I asked her to notice how much warmer her feet felt after those 60 seconds, or how much clearer her head felt because of the increased oxygen flow. Once she realized that the discomfort of moving was temporary, but the disability of sitting was permanent, she chose the temporary discomfort every time. She realized that she wasn't just standing up, she was standing up for her future self. That is the mindset shift that turns a chore into a lifeline.
There is a beautiful phrase I read recently about the unconscious ease of a healthy body, the idea that you don't even think about your knees or your back because they just work. For so many of us over 60, our bodies have become loud. Every stair, every chair, every step comes with a commentary from a joint or a muscle. But you have talked about a 3-month turning point where that internal noise starts to fade away. It seems almost like a dream to think that an 80-year-old could reach a point where they forget they have bad knees. Is it really possible to silence that chronic physical chatter? And what is actually happening deep inside the tissues during those 90 days of consistency?
It is not a dream, Jane. It is biology. I saw this transformation in a very powerful way with a gentleman I've mentioned before, Bob Miller from Columbus. After he moved past that initial fear of the wheelchair, he committed to a 90-day protocol of small, consistent changes: the morning hydration, the protein-rich breakfast, and the staggered movement. He told me that for the first week, he was just angry. His body was protesting the new demands. By the first month, he noticed he could walk to the end of his street without needing to stop. But the real magic happened at the 3-month mark. He called me and said, Sanjay, I went out to my garden this morning. I spent an hour weeding, and it wasn't until I came back inside for water that I realized I hadn't thought about my knees once. That is the unconscious ease you mentioned. In those 90 days, his body had actually remodeled itself. His tendons had become more resilient, his muscle fibers had thickened, and most importantly, his brain had downgraded the pain signals because it no longer perceived movement as a threat.
That sounds like a profound shift in the internal weather of a person's life. To go from a state where your body is a constant source of anxiety to a state where it is a reliable tool, again, must be life-changing. But 90 days can feel like an eternity when you are in pain or when you are discouraged. What do you say to the person who is at day 15 and feels like they aren't making progress fast enough? How do you help them see the micro repairs that are happening beneath the surface, even when the scale or the pain meter hasn't moved as much as they hoped?
I tell them that they are building a cathedral, Jane. You don't see the grand architecture in the first few weeks of laying the foundation. I explained that on day 15, their mitochondria, the power plants of their cells, are actually increasing in number. Their capillaries are expanding to bring more blood to starved tissues. These are invisible victories. I also warn them about the trap of perfection. Many people think if they miss a day, they've failed. I tell them the body doesn't demand perfection, it rewards persistence. Bob had days where he felt tired or where the Ohio weather made his joints ache, but he didn't quit. He just did a scaled back version. Consistency is the language the body speaks. If you give it the same positive signals day after day, it eventually accepts them as the new normal. By day 90, you aren't just a person who is trying to be healthy, you have literally become a person with a different physiological profile. Your biological age has actually moved backward.
It is a radical thought that we can actually edit our biological age through these small, repetitive acts. I think about the phrase, "I'm too old for this," which is so common in our culture. It is almost like a badge of honor we wear to excuse ourselves from the effort of living fully. But if what you are saying is true, that phrase is actually a toxic lie we tell ourselves. How do we start to change that internal dialogue? How do we replace "I'm too old" with something that reflects the true potential of a 70 or 80-year-old body that is being properly nourished and moved?
We have to replace "I am too old" with "I am out of practice." Age is a chronological fact, but old is a state of physiological decay that is often avoidable. When Bob stopped saying he was too old to garden and started saying "my body is learning how to garden again," his entire chemistry changed. Stress hormones like cortisol went down and growth-related signals went up. I tell my patients to look at their bodies with a sense of curiosity rather than judgment. Instead of saying "my hip is broken," try saying "let's see how my hip feels after I drink this water and walk for 5 minutes." It is about giving the body a chance to surprise you. The 3-month mark is when the surprises become your daily reality. You stop being a patient and you start being a participant. And there is no greater feeling in the world than realizing your future is no longer a shrinking box, but a landscape that is opening back up.
We often wait for the scream of a crisis, a fall, a fracture, or a sudden inability to walk before we take our health seriously. But you have suggested that our bodies are actually whispering to us long before the catastrophe happens. These whispers are so easy to ignore or to write off as just getting older. For many, it is a slight heaviness in the legs, a little bit of brain fog after a heavy breakfast, or a restless night's sleep. I want to talk about these early warning signs. How do we learn to listen to the whispers so we can prevent the scream? And what are the most common yellow lights that people in their 70s and 80s are ignoring right now?
That is a critical question, Jane, because prevention is always quieter than the cure. I think of a patient of mine, Franklin Davis. Everyone calls him Frank. He is 88 years old and lives at 602 Maple Street in Boise, Idaho. Frank was a very sharp man, a former engineer, but he started noticing these whispers that he initially ignored. He'd wake up and feel a heavy sensation in his legs, almost like he was walking through mud. He'd have a breakfast of toast and cereal and then feel like he needed a 2-hour nap because his brain felt cloudy. By the evening, he was irritable and his balance felt off when he went to the bathroom in the dark. He just thought, well, I'm nearly 90. This is what it's supposed to feel like. But these weren't signs of age. They were signs of metabolic and circulatory distress. His heavy legs were a whisper of poor circulation and low protein. His brain fog was a whisper of blood sugar instability. And his balance issues were a whisper of a fading mind-body connection.
It is so easy to see why Frank would just shrug those things off. We are almost taught that to be old is to be tired and stiff. But when you look at someone like Frank with his engineering mind, how did you help him re-engineer his daily signals? If the heavy legs and the cloudy brain are the yellow lights, what is the immediate roadside repair? How do we stop that slide into the red light zone where a fall or a hospital stay becomes inevitable?
I told Frank that we needed to recalibrate his sensors. The first thing we did was address his morning hydration and nutrition. That cloudy brain after breakfast was a huge clue. I had him switch to a high-protein breakfast and drink 16 ounces of water before he even touched his coffee. We also addressed his heavy legs by introducing intermittent movement. I told him, Frank, you can't just sit in your den all day and expect your legs to be ready for you at 5 o'clock p.m. We started the half-block rule. Every morning, regardless of how he felt, he walked just half a block and back. It wasn't about the distance, it was about the signal. I told him to pay attention to the thaw. If the stiffness started to melt after 5 minutes of moving, that was a sign his body was still functional. If the stiffness got worse, that was a different signal. By teaching him to read his body like he used to read blueprints, he gained a sense of control. He realized that the whispers were actually his body's way of asking for help.
It's a powerful shift from being a victim of your symptoms to being a detective of your own health. But Frank is 88. At that age, many people feel like the warranty has expired and there is no point in trying to fix the machinery. How did he handle the mental hurdle of starting something new at nearly 90? And for our listeners who feel like they've ignored the whispers for too long, maybe they are already in the red light zone. Is it still possible to find a way back to the yellow or even the green?
Frank's engineering background actually helped because he understood that a system in motion stays in motion. But even for those without that background, the proof is in the feeling. After just 10 days of his new routine, Frank told me that the mud in his legs felt more like water. He felt lighter. That immediate feedback is what breaks the warranty expired mindset. And to your point about being in the red zone, yes, there is always a way to improve. Even if you are already using a walker or struggling significantly, you can still listen and respond. Maybe for you, the whisper is just moving your ankles while you sit or choosing a better snack. The body is incredibly forgiving. It doesn't look back at the years of neglect. It only looks at the signals you are sending right now. Frank's story is a reminder that as long as you are breathing, your body is still trying to keep you moving. You just have to stop ignoring the messages it's sending from the engine room.
There is a multi-billion-dollar industry dedicated to selling us healthy food. And as we get older, we become the prime targets. We see labels like low-fat, heart-healthy, or fortified with vitamins, and we fill our pantries with granola bars, fruit yogurts, and diet shakes. We think we are doing everything right, but then we still feel inflamed, our joints still ache, and our energy still bottoms out by mid-afternoon. It feels like a betrayal. Why is it that so many healthy foods on the grocery store shelves are actually contributing to the very problems like inflammation and muscle loss that we are trying to solve?
It is a massive deception, Jane, and it is particularly cruel to the senior population. Let's take low-fat yogurt as an example. When companies take the fat out, they usually replace it with sugar or artificial sweeteners to keep the taste. For a 70-year-old, that sugar is a direct ticket to joint inflammation and insulin resistance. Or look at granola bars. Many are essentially candy bars disguised in oats and honey. They are loaded with industrial seed oils like soybean oil, which are highly pro-inflammatory. I see patients all the time who say, "Dr. Gupta, I eat yogurt and granola every morning. Why do I feel so stiff?" And I have to tell them, you are essentially starting your day with a bowl of inflammation. As we age, our margin for error with nutrition shrinks. What you could get away with at 30, your body will no longer tolerate at 70. The healthy label is often just marketing. The true health is in the ingredients list, and if that list looks like a chemistry experiment, your body is going to treat it like one.
It is so frustrating to think we are being misled while we are trying so hard to be responsible. It's like we are trying to put out a fire with a squirt gun full of gasoline. If we are to look at our kitchens as a pharmacy, how do we start to separate the medicine from the poison? For someone who has relied on these convenient, healthy foods for years, what is the most effective way to clean the slate? What are the real healthy foods that actually love our bodies back and help us maintain that precious mobility and mental clarity?
The rule of thumb I give my patients is eat things that had a mother or came from the earth in their original form. Then we need to move back to real food. Instead of that fruit yogurt, have plain Greek yogurt and add your own berries and walnuts. Instead of a granola bar, have a handful of almonds and an apple with some cinnamon. Cinnamon is a wonderful natural anti-inflammatory, by the way. We need to prioritize high-quality proteins, real eggs, wild-caught fish, or even a good piece of grass-fed beef, because that is what protects your muscles. And we cannot forget healthy fats. Extra virgin olive oil is like liquid gold for an aging brain and aging joints. I tell my patients to be food detectives. If a food comes in a box with a long shelf life, it's probably not going to help you have a long, active life. When you switch to real, whole foods, you aren't just eating. You are providing the high-octane fuel your body needs to keep the machinery running smoothly.
It's about returning to the basics, isn't it? The way our grandparents might have eaten before everything was processed for convenience. But there is a real challenge here: convenience. When you are 80, cooking a full meal can feel like a chore. The grab-and-go nature of those bars and shakes is very tempting. How do we make real food as easy as processed food so that the path of least resistance still leads to health? And what is the one thing, the one food swap that you believe would have the biggest impact on reducing the chronic pain and fatigue so many seniors face?
You're right, convenience is the hurdle. I suggest batch prepping simple things. Boil half a dozen eggs at once so they are ready in the fridge. Keep a big jar of walnuts on the counter. Pre-wash your berries. If it's visible and easy, you'll reach for it. But if I had to pick one golden swap that would change everything, it would be replacing all industrial seed oils with extra virgin olive oil and replacing the morning toast with 2 eggs. That single shift, moving from carbs and inflammation to protein and healthy fats, can change the way a person feels in as little as 72 hours. I have seen it happen over and over again. Patients come back and say their knees feel quieter and they have more get up and go. That isn't a miracle. It's just biology finally being given the right instructions. We have to stop falling for the healthy labels and start listening to how our bodies actually feel after we eat. Your joints will tell you the truth long before the label does.
We have talked about the fear of the wheelchair and the dangers of sitting too long, but I want to focus now on the 7-minute miracle you often mention. It seems almost too simple that just 7 minutes in the morning could be the difference between a life of limitation and a life of movement. For someone in their 90s, 7 minutes can feel like a long time if they are afraid of falling or if they feel weak. I'm thinking of those who have become so cautious that they've stopped moving almost entirely. How do we introduce this ritual to someone who is terrified of their own shadow? And why is this specific time frame so critical for reclaiming our balance and our strength?
It is all about the signal-to-noise ratio in the body, Jane. And I want to tell you about Evelyn Carter. Evelyn is 92 years old and lives at 77 Pinecrest Avenue in Portland, Maine. When I met Evelyn, she was living small. She was so afraid of falling that she barely left her favorite armchair. She walked with a very wide, shuffling gait, never lifting her feet more than an inch off the carpet. This cautious walking was actually making her more likely to trip. Her muscles were forgotten, and her balance centers in the brain were offline. I told her, Evelyn, we aren't going to do a workout. We are going to do a 7-minute morning ceremony to wake up your body. We focused on what I call the 7-minute mobility ritual. It's designed to hit the most critical areas: the breath, the calf pump, the ankles, and the mind-foot connection.
A morning ceremony sounds so much more inviting than a rehab exercise. It changes the energy of the request. For Evelyn, who was so afraid, what were those 7 minutes actually like? Can you walk us through the movements? If someone is listening right now and wants to try this tomorrow morning, what are the specific gears they are turning on? And how does this ritual combat that shuffling gait that makes falling such a constant threat for the very elderly?
We started with the awakening. For the first minute, while still sitting on the edge of her bed, Evelyn just took deep, diaphragmatic breaths and did slow ankle circles. This gets the lotion moving in the joints and oxygenates the blood. The second minute was the pump, simple calf raises while holding onto her dresser for total safety. As I told her, the Bap Chan is like a second heart. It sends the blood back up to the brain. Minutes 3 and 4 were the march, just lifting her knees a little higher than usual while standing in place, still holding on. This retrains the brain to lift the feet, breaking that dangerous shuffle. Minute 5 was the heel-to-toe rock, slowly shifting weight to wake up the sensors in the soles of the feet. Minute 6 was the reach, gently reaching for the ceiling to decompress the spine. And the final minute was the intention, just standing still, feeling her feet firmly on the floor and saying, I am stable. Yeah.
It is so profound because it addresses the body and the mind at the same time. You are giving her the physical tools, but you are also giving her the psychological permission to be strong. I love the idea of the intention at the end. For Evelyn, what was the result? How long did it take for her to stop shuffling and start feeling like she could actually trust the floor beneath her again? And for those who might miss a day, does the whole system reset, or is there a cumulative effect that builds up over time?
The effect is absolutely cumulative, Jane. Evelyn started to notice a difference in just 3 days. She told me she felt taller, By the end of the first month, she was no longer shuffling. She was taking distinct, confident steps. She even started walking down to her mailbox again, something she hadn't done in 2 years. The fear didn't vanish, but it was no longer the boss of her. As for missing a day, the body is very forgiving, but it loves rhythm. I told her, Evelyn, if you miss a day, don't beat yourself up, just come back to the ceremony the next morning. The goal is to make it as automatic as brushing your teeth. When you do this ritual, you are essentially calibrating your nervous system for the day ahead. You are telling your brain exactly where your feet are and exactly how much power your legs have. For someone like Evelyn, those 7 minutes were the key that unlocked the door to the rest of her life. She went from waiting to die in a chair to truly living in her home again.
We have covered so much ground today, from the dangers of the toast and jam breakfast to the 7-minute ritual that saved Evelyn. But as we move toward the conclusion of this conversation, I want to talk about the perfection trap. So many people listen to health advice and feel overwhelmed. They think, I can't do it all, so why do anything? Or they wait for the perfect Monday to start, or for their knee pain to go away before they start moving. It is a form of procrastination that masquerades as being careful. If you could boil everything down to a few golden rules that require no perfection, just presence, what would they be? And how do we handle the inevitable bad days when the body just doesn't want to cooperate?
My first golden rule is never let perfect be the enemy of better. If you can't walk for 10 minutes, walk for 1. If you can't give up all sugar, just start with a better breakfast. The body responds to the direction of your choices, not just the magnitude. My second rule is prioritize the big 3: water, protein, and intermittent movement. If you do nothing else, drink water before coffee, eat 2 eggs, and stand up every 30 minutes. These are the 3 pillars that support almost everything else. And my third rule, which is perhaps the most important for those over 60, is to respect your rest, but never let it become stagnation. I've had many patients ask about the right time to eat dinner. I tell them, eat early. Giving your body 4 hours to digest before sleep reduces inflammation and allows for much deeper, more restorative sleep. When you sleep better, you wake up with less morning rust in your joints.
That morning rust is such a perfect description of how so many people feel. It's that initial stiffness that makes you want to stay in bed. I want to go back to the early dinner point because it seems so simple but is often ignored. Why is the timing of that last meal so critical for how our joints feel the next morning? And when we have a bad day, maybe a flare-up of arthritis or just a day of deep fatigue, how do we distinguish between I need real rest and I'm letting the rust take over?
When you eat a heavy meal late at night, your body has to divert energy to digestion instead of cellular repair. Furthermore, late-night carbs increase systemic inflammation while you sleep. You wake up puffy and stiff because your body spent the night fighting your dinner instead of fixing your joints. Regarding the bad days, I use the 2-minute rule. If you feel terrible, tell yourself you will just move for 2 minutes. If after 2 minutes you still feel like you are pushing through bad pain, the sharp stabbing kind, then stop and rest. That is your body asking for recovery. But 9 times out of 10, after those 2 minutes of gentle movement, the morning rust starts to flake off and you realize you actually feel better. The bad days are often when the 7-minute ritual is the most important. You don't have to do it perfectly, you just have to do it.
It is about being a kind but firm coach to yourself. I think we often treat our bodies like a car that is broken rather than a garden that is thirsty. A thirsty garden doesn't need a miracle. It just needs a little water consistently. As we look at the legacy we want to leave, it's not just about the money or the stories, it's about the capability we keep. To be able to pick up a grandchild or walk through a museum, that is the real wealth. How does a person who has felt broken for a long time start to see themselves as a thirsty garden instead? What is the shift in mindset that allows them to believe their capability can actually grow at 70, 80, or 90?
It starts with 1 successful inch. When you realize that you can stand up without help or that your head is clearer after a glass of water, the broken narrative starts to crumble. I tell my patients to stop looking at the whole staircase and just look at the next step. Every time you choose protein over sugar or movement over the chair, you are voting for a different version of yourself. You are telling your body, I still believe in you. And the most amazing thing I've seen in my career is how the body responds to that belief. It doesn't matter how long you've been rusty. The moment you start providing the right fuel and the right signals, the repair work begins. You are never too old to be a better version of yourself than you were yesterday. The golden rule is simply this: start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. The rest of the miracle will take care of itself.
We have reached the end of this journey today, but in many ways for our listeners, it is just the beginning. We started with the story of a 93-year-old walking 5 miles a day, and we've realized that such a life isn't a freak accident of nature. It is a masterpiece built from 7-minute rituals, glasses of water, and the courage to stand up when it's easier to sit. It's about freedom, not the grand political kind of freedom, but the intimate personal freedom of being able to tie your own shoes, walk through your own front door, and live without the constant shadow of a wheelchair hanging over you. Sanjay, as we close, I'm struck by how much of this is within our control. What is your final message to the person listening who feels like their world has been shrinking?
My message is that your world doesn't have to shrink. We have been sold a story that aging is a process of becoming less, but I have seen it be a process of becoming more intentional. I think of all the patients we've talked about today: Bob, Pat, Frank, and Evelyn. None of them were superhuman, and they were all people who were afraid, who were stiff, and who were told they were just getting old. But they all made a choice to reclaim their territory. I want you to remember that your body is on your side. It wants to heal. It wants to move. It is waiting for you to give it the okay to start the repair process. Every choice you make tomorrow morning, the glass of water, the eggs instead of the toast, the 7 minutes of movement, is a brick in the wall of your independence. You aren't just staying healthy, you are defending your dignity and your joy.
Defending your dignity. That is a powerful way to put it. It turns health into a matter of honor. I want to thank you, Sanjay, for your wisdom, your stories, and for reminding us that the prophecy of decline is something we can challenge every single day. It has been an enlightening and, more importantly, a deeply hopeful conversation. I feel like I'm ready to go do my 7 minutes right now.
It has been an honor, Jane. Thank you for giving a voice to this. To everyone listening, please don't wait for a perfect time. Start tomorrow morning, drink that water, eat that protein, and move your body just a little bit more than you did today. You will be amazed at how quickly your body responds to being seen and cared for again. I look forward to hearing your stories of reclaiming your freedom. Thank you for having me, and stay strong.
And thank you all for joining us on Healthy Kidneys After 60. This has been a special episode about reclaiming your life, one small habit at a time. If you found today's conversation helpful, please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our upcoming podcasts. We have so much more to explore together, from brain health to the secrets of longevity. Share this with someone you love who might need a little nudge to get out of that recliner. Until next time, I'm Jane Pauley. Take those steps, drink your water, and remember, your best miles may still be ahead of you. Good night and stay well.